A very good afternoon to you and welcome to today's edition of Joy Business Masterclass. Masterclass is powered by Joy Business and brought to us by Goyle. Goyle, good energy, Goyle, Yenara, Yedia. Masterclass comes your way every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. and runs all the way through to 2:15 p.m. here on your superstation Joy 99.7. My name, as always, is Yaw Barnafo, and I'm excited to be your host for today's edition of Masterclass. Last week, we introduced a conversation on stakeholder management and the project management. And we sort of even made the statement and said that typically everything in life, depending on how you look at it, can be termed as a project. In that conversation, we introduced the conversation by looking at the world of stakeholders. So who are stakeholders? We defined what stakeholders meant. And essentially, we said that a stakeholder is anybody who is part of any process who has skin in the game, or you're affected by it, or you can affect it. And that was a very wonderful conversation. Today, we're continuing that conversation and we move it a bit further. We're going to be talking about stakeholder planning. Stakeholder planning. How does one get to become a stakeholder of any process? How is the selection process done? Is it by natural order or is it by inclusion? Is it by the fact that you're sponsoring? How is that whole process done? We're going to be talking about stakeholder planning. To do that for us, we have back here in the studio with us Latif Abubakar, who's become a friend of the show, renowned Ghanaian professional with various competencies, particularly in the area of project and event management. He's also the CEO of Globe Management Institute, and he's been talking to us about stakeholder management. Latif, you're welcome to today's conversation.
Thank you very much.
We're happy to have you. Last week, we started the conversation on introducing the world of stakeholders and essentially who or what a stakeholder was and what it meant in terms of project management. We even went ahead to say that depending on how you look at it, a project can span from 1 hour to a long period of time. And so depending on how you look at it, everything can be looked at as a project. We're going a bit further today, and we're streaming live on Facebook for those of us who want to watch us live. Latif has obliged us a couple of slides. So those slides are also airing live on Facebook. You can follow the thought process for chronology. Latif, let's continue. Maybe a quick recap of last week's conversation, if you will.
Yeah.
And we can go straight into today's
So
conversation.
I think that one of the basic things for this conversation was to define what stakeholder actually meant or means. And we spoke about the fact that when we talk about a stakeholder, it's a person that can affect a project positively, or a person that a project can affect positively or negatively.
Or negatively.
Yeah, so it's that positively or negatively. So wherever you are, either the project can affect the person or the person can affect the project positively or negatively. People who have interest in projects too as well are referred to as what? Stakeholders. So we talked about that, and one of the key things that we try to focus on are what kind of stakeholders can you find on your project? What are the simplest, easiest kind of stakeholders you can find on your project? So we spoke about the list of the primary stakeholders, which is the project manager, the sponsor, the customer, the performing organization, and then we talked about the project team, and then the information providers. Of course, stakeholders could extend beyond these names we've mentioned or these roles we've mentioned, but these are primarily on every project. You could identify these people, or you should identify these people as stakeholders. It took us to another conversation, which is very, very, very important when it comes to project management or even delivery of work at every place. How do we judge the success of a project? And then I went ahead to say that at first we were focused more on executing projects on time, within budget, and then to specification. And if we achieve that, we would say that we have successfully delivered a project or delivered a particular work. Unfortunately, it goes beyond that now. It goes beyond that because of stakeholder satisfaction. And we say that you cannot achieve the success of a project without stakeholder satisfaction. If stakeholders' requirements are not met, forget it. You can meet on time, on schedule, within budget, but if their requirements are not met, that is it. Sometimes you might miss the on time. You would be behind schedule. You can be ahead of over budget. You can also not meet the initial requirements. But if stakeholders are satisfied with whatever you are doing, automatically you have succeeded. So that's how we say that now the success criteria lies with what? The stakeholders, basically, their satisfaction, not necessarily the be on time, over budget, and specification. They are equally important, extremely important, but if we are weighing, we go towards the stakeholders one way or the other. Then we also spoke about, so as part of the world of stakeholders, we also spoke about, or we went ahead to talk about stakeholders basically in terms of how to involve stakeholders on projects. We didn't go into details, and then we spoke about stakeholder identification. But I thought that we should rather lay out the processes that is involved in engaging stakeholders. So if you want to engage stakeholders, what do you do? If you want to succeed with regards to stakeholder management on a project, what do you do? And there are certain steps. There are about 9 steps that we go through to make sure that at least you will be able to engage and manage stakeholders properly on your project. The first thing, to involve a stakeholder or to involve stakeholders in whatever you're doing properly, you need to identify all of them. You need to
Identify the stakeholders.
Yes, you need to identify all the stakeholders. You understand? 2, you need to determine their requirements. You need to determine 3, you need to determine their interest and influence. So you identify all the stakeholders, determine their requirements, determine their influence, determine their requirement, determine their influence, determine their interest. It's critical because it is the requirements, interest, and influence that will help you understand who they are properly. Then you need to also determine what is the communication plan. How am I going to communicate with these stakeholders is the next step. So the communication plan is important because with regards to stakeholders, it's bottom line communication.
It's interesting that you talk about the communication plan because I think that beyond our problem of corporate governance as a people and as entrepreneurs and as business owners, one of the things that we also have a problem with is communication.
Yeah.
So, for example, and that's why in agreements you will find that people say, if I write to your place of address you have given me, it is considered that I have communicated. But it has to be clear.
Yes, it has to be clear.
Very,
very, very clear. Yeah. So we'll touch base on.
I was going to say, just dwell on it a bit for me, for my business owners.
Okay.
Why in any project they undertake as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as CEOs, as COOs, it's important to be clear about the channels of communication.
Because if you are not clear, we see it as noise. We see that so the reason why we emphasize on clear is that clear is a bit relative. You need to be specified even what clear simply means to other people. But if you are not clear, we see any information you have provided as noise, meaning that it will be misunderstood by people and they will do the wrong thing at the end of the day. That is why we focus on, but we will come to communication proper as part of the planning. So it's something that we'll discuss when we get to planning. And so then plan communication, then how do you communicate also comes in, or begin communication comes in. So you plan it, you begin communication, then you begin the management of stakeholders engagements. So that's where you begin documenting issues and then that are arising from your engagement with the stakeholders, and then changes that are arising from the engagement of the stakeholders. Then now you monitor and evaluate the processes you're going through. In terms of your communication, your engagement, you need to monitor and evaluate them properly. So for you to be able to involve stakeholders properly on your project, you need to go through these particular steps, which I just mentioned. Basically, identify, get their requirements, their influence, interest, develop a communication plan, begin communication, begin managing their engagement, and then monitor and evaluate the stakeholders' engagement one way or the other. So that is actually the steps that you need to go through if you want to involve stakeholders. Now we are talking about stakeholder analysis. We touched on stakeholder analysis a bit. It involves developing a strategy that will help you identify stakeholders, clarify their needs, wants, and expectations.
Right.
So, and the needs, wants, and expectations are what we turn into requirements. So that stakeholder analysis is just how strategies by which you could use to identify all the stakeholders and gather their requirements. Because the success of the project, so the process of clarifying their needs, wants, and expectations is extremely important. Because we say the success of the project depending on meeting those needs. So if you don't clarify it well, it means that you'll be working towards a need that is not what the stakeholder actually
It's
requires.
ambiguous.
So definitely you must make sure that process is done properly and well, so that when you are meeting the needs, automatically you yourself know that you are succeeding in the project you are embarking on. So that is it with stakeholder analysis. The core of stakeholder analysis is identifying stakeholders.
Right.
We spoke about identifying stakeholders last week, and we mentioned how you could identify stakeholders. The essence of identifying stakeholders is to come up with a document, which we refer to as the stakeholder register, which is a tall list of stakeholders. So the register has a tall list of stakeholders, their contacts, their needs or their requirements, their expectations. So you can reach to all stakeholders and begin conversations with them. It's actually also part of the plan, one way or the other. Then, so that's the essence of the identifying stakeholder process. But the question is, how do you go about identifying the stakeholders? Last week, we mentioned the fact that you can use questionnaires and surveys to collect information from stakeholders. We mentioned that. We also mentioned brainstorming and then mentioned brainwriting. So we spoke about the questionnaires, and then we spoke about the stakeholder analysis itself. It's a process where in identifying stakeholders, the stakeholder analysis that you go through there is a process where you try to identify people and figure out how the project is going to affect them, or how the person can affect or influence your project positively or negatively. If any of those factors can be attributed to the person, automatically that person becomes what? Part of the list of stakeholders within your stakeholder.
You notice I'm smiling when you talked about brainwriting and brainstorming, because
why?
Even though we are not interactive yet, I think as you talked about it,
Yes.
one of our listeners just sent a message that they wanted the difference between the two. So we've seen your comments. When we get interactive, we'll by all means address it. But it's interesting you sent it just the same time that you were talking about it. Yes. But let's proceed.
So answer it. So then we say that. So within the stakeholder analysis process, I mean, I'm not emphasizing it's a recap, so we are moving away from it. But that is in brief, using questionnaires, surveys, stakeholder analysis, brainwriting, brainstorming to be able to identify the list of people that are required.
Now, how do you plan? Now that you've identified them,
that you've identified them, you move towards the plan, basically. And we say that for every project, managing relationship, managing the influence, managing the engagement process, managing the interest of stakeholders is critical to the success of the project. But it takes time. That is why you need to think and plan on how to do that. If you fail to do the thinking and planning process on how to do that, then automatically your project will be in danger. So that is the essence of why we plan. We're saying that stakeholders can be an asset or they can be a liability. If you don't plan properly, of course, you see them as liabilities. But if you plan properly, even the bad ones, because you've planned on how to handle them, you automatically don't see them as liabilities. You understand? But if you don't plan properly, then you are in for trouble. The plan stakeholder process is basically a process that plan stakeholder engagement is a process that helps you develop strategies on how to clearly manage your stakeholders and develop action plans on what to do and how to go about managing them. So we say that it's developing strategy that will provide the team with clear, actionable plan on how to engage and interact with stakeholders. That's the stakeholder management plan. Now, what do you need to be able to plan? Is what we should be talking about. One, of course, you need your project management plan. Any document you have developed, which includes your communication management plan, your stakeholder register, is also key because you're going to manage the stakeholders. So the things that you require or you would need for you to be able to manage, to develop the plan that you require to engage stakeholders is basically your project management plan and then your stakeholder register.
Register.
And when we talk about project management plan, there are certain elements of the plan that are important to us. For instance, there's an element like the communication management plan, which is very relevant to us. There's also an element like the risk, which is also very relevant to us.
Yeah.
Communication management plan, because the bottom line of success, of achieving success when it comes to stakeholder engagement and management, is communication. Risk is also important to us because some stakeholders that you'll be engaging on the project might be risk to the project. It happens a lot.
In themselves.
Yes, in themselves. So there will be risks to the project. Oh, wait. When they take the document to me, we'll sit on it. It will take so many effort and time before you're able to.
Translates into extended time and therefore charges
Exactly.
on the project.
Exactly. So you need to be able to figure out how to get the relevant documents within the plan. And I've said that most of the relevant documents for me usually is a communication management plan, and then also the risk management plan. They are very critical when it comes to stakeholder management or plan stakeholder engagement. Now the question is, so we've talked about what to do in terms of what you need for you to be able to engage or plan stakeholder engagement. Now, what will be the tools required, the skills required, the techniques required for you to be able to translate your project management plan or your stakeholder register into a stakeholder engagement plan? That's the ultimate, that's your output, that's what you require at the end of the day. That's the document you'll be working with. So you ask yourself, if I have my register and then I also have my project management plan, how do I translate my register, my stakeholder register, and my project management plan into the stakeholder engagement plan, which is the ultimate document you're looking for, because you would work with the stakeholder engagement plan. Now, we would say that, of course, through meetings with other people, you should be able to achieve that.
Data sharing as well.
Exactly. Data sharing, when you're having meetings, brainstorming, analytical techniques, you'll be able to come up with a very good plan. I know most people work well with plans when they have templates, and I will speak about, we'll definitely capture that aspect. You need an expert who can also help you. Sometimes you might not be the expert in developing the stakeholder engagement plan, but you can get someone who has done it over and over and over, or you can get a template, look through the template, and then the information required on the template are basically derived from the project management plan and then the stakeholder register,
Which you already have.
So with meetings with other people, with an expert and analytical techniques, you should be able to couch your stakeholder engagement plan from the register and the project management plan, specifically the communication management plan and then the risk management plan. At the end of the day, you have your stakeholder engagement plan. What does that entail? So I would say, okay, so what does a typical stakeholder engagement plan entails or look like? For us, we say that for you to have a proper stakeholder engagement plan, you must have, it can be in the form of a spreadsheet, depending on how you want to go. But I'm trying to itemize it, and then you can look at how you develop or couch your template out of it. You need the list of stakeholders, obviously.
Naturally, from your register.
From the register, which you have already.
Yes.
You need their expectations. Or you need aside the list, you need their requirements.
I was going to say, which was one out of the objectives.
The needs.
All the three things.
Yes, the needs, wants, and expectations. Yeah. You get the requirements of them. Then you look out for their level of interest and influence on the project.
Okay.
You understand? Because that helps with you on your plan. Because the influence and interest and the power level. Yes, last week we talked about the power interest grade or the power influence grade as part of the stakeholder mapping strategy. So we are saying that because it's always important to know how influential, what's the interest level, and how powerful a stakeholder is. So you need to know that. You need to also be able to determine the timelines you would use to engage each of the stakeholders. You must have time frames for engaging each of the stakeholders. And these timelines means that you're going to have a conversation with most of the stakeholders, not all. Sometimes it can be in a group form. Sometimes it can be one-on-one conversation. Or sometimes it can be personal meetings with other stakeholders. So you have the timelines. Then you look out for how, when, what aspect of communication you would require for each stakeholder. How you're going to communicate, when you're going to communicate to the stakeholder, what are you going to communicate to those particular stakeholders. It's part of the stakeholder engagement plan. Now you can look out for the type and methods of communication you required. The types and methods of communication. When we talk about the types of communication, there are 4 types of communication. Here we talk about the formal written type of communication, the informal written. So formal written is letters, formal letters signed, and so on and so forth. The informal written can be sticky notes and so on and so forth. Then we have the formal verbal type of conversation, which is speeches and presentations are formal verbal. Then we have the informal verbal too. Video call meetings and so on and so forth are also seen as informal verbal. Those are the types of communication, because each stakeholder, depending on the power and the level of power, interest and influence, you would require some kind of type of communication that you would use for them. So
would social media qualify as a formal or informal way of communication on a project?
It will be informal. It will be informal.
Because these days, a lot of things happen on WhatsApp. People are working on WhatsApp.
So good. So if you agree, so that's it. So we say that that's how come we need to agree on the methods of communication or the types of communication, so that as part of your plan, it is there that when it comes to this category of stakeholders, our method or that we would use, or the mode of communication for those particular stakeholders would include this. Prescribed method of communication would include A, B, C, D. So we talk about the types of communication, we talk about the mode of communication, and we talk about the methods. The methods are categorized into 3. That's the pull, push, and interactive. Interactive means that it's the meetings, that there's always a feedback. So the kind of video conferencing, on-ground meetings, one-on-one meetings, calls, there's always a feedback with regards to interaction. The push type of method of communication is the method of communication where you send information to the stakeholders that need it. You don't require feedback.
Right.
So, for instance, we're in school, and then during our time, when we're about to write exams, the school would just put our timetables on the notice board. The registry will just paste our timetables on all notice board. They don't require a feedback from us that I've gone to copy my timetable. Nobody. How many people do that? You don't do that.
If you like, don't
see it. So this is called the push type of sending information to people who need it. It does not require a feedback message. That's the push. And then the pull is the kind of stakeholders that you want them to go for information at their own discretion.
Okay.
So you are not bothered. You put information there, and then you expect that. So people researching on Google, on the internet for information, go pick a graphic or go to the library to get information. It's like it's called a pull form of communication. And then we have the interactive. That's more of the one that is always a feedback. Both pull and push forms of communication do not require a feedback message. But interactive requires what? A feedback message. So interactive form of communication is seen as the best and most effective method of communication. So that is actually, so if you have a stakeholder that has high power, high interest, then you should know that most of your communication will be interactive. Right. You want to get his feedback,
so that decisions can be made
quickly, and then the right decisions can be made. Not the kind of stakeholder that you will just send the information to him, and whether he replies or not, you don't care. As for stakeholders with high power, high interest, like your sponsor, you care about whatever reply is giving you.
After 3 days, they say, I haven't seen it.
So determining the type and method of communication is critical with regards to the stakeholder engagement plan. That's why we say, aside your list of stakeholders, their expectations, their level of influence, interest, and power, then the timelines for engagement, then you can look at when, what, and how you're going to communicate to them. Then you can look at the types and methods of communication you're going to be required to manage them. Then finally, how are you going to monitor and evaluate the identification process, how you identify them, how you're engaging them, and how you're going to communicate with them. There must be a monitoring and evaluation scheme structure for this, because this will help you come up with the various issues that they have, and then what changes that are required. So the monitoring and evaluation bit of the plan is also critical when it comes to the stakeholder engagement plan. So for a simple stakeholder engagement plan, we say that you must know, the plan must have the list of stakeholders, how you're going to identify the stakeholders. Then you look at the level of influence, interest, and power of each of the stakeholders. The timelines you would use in engaging each of the stakeholders. Then when, what, and how you're going to communicate to each of the stakeholders. Then you look at the types and methods of communication. And finally, how are you going to evaluate, monitor, and evaluate the identification process? How are you going to monitor and evaluate the communication process? How are you going to monitor and evaluate the engagement process? At least these monitoring and evaluation will give you a list of issues and then probably a list of changes. So we come up with certain documents we call the issue log and then the change log. Those are documents that we use to record various issues that are coming up from managing stakeholders, and then various changes that are coming out.
As you speak, I hear you talk about a lot of interaction that will take place in putting together the project plan.
Yeah.
So obviously you're going to review all of the information received in the register and also on the plan to put it together to be able to build the communication, the types of communication and all that. The key word I hear there that is required in all of this process is consensus.
Yes.
And so then it brings to my mind another word, which is dispute resolution. Not even in the project, in the planning process.
Yeah.
At what point you need to move? You need to be able to make a decision where you have a stalemate. How do you progress?
So you progress whilst you are progressing. So I mean, you solve.
Do you lean towards power? I mean, high power, high interest.
Yes.
Because where you have to make, sometimes some of the stakeholders are stakeholders by virtue of their involvement,
Exactly.
not necessarily by virtue of competence.
Exactly. Yes.
You understand? It's not because of competence. They are there by virtue of the fact that they are involved in your project.
Yeah.
Now, as a result of that, they may or may not agree to a certain approach.
Yeah.
But they may not even be the project owner.
That is exactly why we have the demarcation of the level of authority in terms of interest, power, and influence. You lean towards power and high interest.
Brilliant.
You lean towards that and use that to make your decisions. Those are the people that can easily draw you back and you don't have a choice. You understand? For people that have low power, low interest, then you know how to manage them, because they might be making most noise, but their noise might not be relevant to the progress of the project.
Exactly.
One way or the other. So you lean towards high power, high interest on such projects.
If you've just joined us, this is Masterclass here on your Superstation Joy 99.7. We're here in the studio with Latif Abubakar. We're talking about stakeholder analysis and stakeholder planning. We'll be getting interactive shortly so that our listeners can be a part of it. But let me ask a quick question before we get interactive. Maybe you can start answering it or start thinking about it before we get interactive. Is power or interest self-arrogated or assigned?
It is not. So power and interest, it's also analyzed based on the roles and responsibilities of the people on the project.
I'll come back on that question because the answer I want to push you. But let's take a quick message from our sponsors. When we come back, we get interactive.
Okay.
Your favorite on-air business development program, Joy Business Masterclass, is in session, and you can interact with us on Facebook via the Joy 99.7 FM or Joy Business pages. If you tweet, the handle is at Joy 997 FM or at Joy Business GH. Don't forget to hashtag JB Masterclass. You can also call us on 0302 216541 or send your questions and contributions through to the WhatsApp number 0551 111997, and our facilitators will address your concerns. Attention everyone, class is in progress.
Welcome back. If you've just tuned in, this is Masterclass. We're interactive right now. Numbers to call 0302 216 541. That's 0302 216 541. You can pick up that phone and give us a call on 0302 216 541 or send us your message on WhatsApp on 055 1111997. That's 055 1111997. If you have any motor vehicle of any kind, then Goyle has some great news for you. What do you do when you run out of fuel in your vehicle? Do you just stop anywhere? If that's what you do, then please don't do that anymore. Let us introduce you to the Good Energy family and why you must be a part of it. Goyle Super XP Run 95 and Diesel XP are the best quality fuels with high performance in town for your vehicle. Goyle Super XP Run 95 is a high-grade fuel sold at the same price as normal fuel. Goyle's Diesel XP is low in sulfur, making it an eco-friendly option for your vehicle. And with over 440 stations across the nation, we ask that you join the family that rewards you for an energized driving experience. Goyle, Good Energy, Goyle, Yenara, Yedia. The stage is also set for Africa's most prestigious awards event. Join us to celebrate the Men of the Year at the 8th Emmy Awards on Saturday, the 14th of October at the Grand Arena, Accra International Conference Center. Red carpet starts at 6 p.m. Partners, Joy FM, Joy Prime, Diaspora Affairs, Office of the President of Ghana, Rhythms Africa, EY Ghana, and Labadi Beach Hotel. Sponsors, NLA 590 Mobile, I beg your pardon, Arocha Ghana, Go Energy, Flora Tissues, Woodin, DVO Ghana, and Special Ice Mineral Water. We're also supported by Caveman Watches, Baggett Ghana, Joe Pesky, Asuavo Security, M Pedigree, Socialite, MC Bansi Perfumes, By Talata, Lamborghini Energy Drinks, Ghana Post, Think Home Luxury, and Prime Shades Limited. The media partners again are Joy FM, Joy Prime, Emmy Africa Ghana. For more information, please call 020-201-8870 or 0302-738-727. The 8th Emmy Africa Awards, Inspiring Greatness. Welcome back. This is Masterclass. Phone lines are open. Numbers to call 0302-216-541 or send us your comments on 055-1111997. Latif, before you answer the question on whether or not power and influence is self-arrogated or assigned, I've got some comments on social media. This one is from Kofi Boache from Spintex. Kofi, thank you for listening and tuning in this afternoon. Kofi says, can you give us an idea of the stakeholder management plan template? I think that's what you were talking about,
yes,
right?
Yes, the stakeholder management plan.
So do you want to summarize in about 10 seconds?
So I was saying that a typical stakeholder management plan template would involve the list of stakeholders, then the requirements of each of the stakeholders, what they require, then their level of influence, interest, and power,
right,
and what, when, and how you're going to communicate with those stakeholders. Then we look at what, when, what type and methods of communication you're going to use, then how you're going to monitor and evaluate their communication with the stakeholders, how you're going to monitor and evaluate the management, the engagement of the stakeholders, and then also the identification process of each stakeholder. Because remember, the identification process of each stakeholder is an ongoing process.
Brilliant.
You just don't begin. The fact that you started with stakeholder identification does not mean that that is the end. Even going through the process, after you are done identifying stakeholders, there's a possibility that some stakeholders will be identified whilst you are ongoing. Even at the latter part of the project, there's a possibility.
So there you go, Kofi. I hope that this has answered your question. I've got Nadede Botre. Now, you didn't say where you were reaching us from. Now says, what's the difference between brainwriting and brainstorming. This is the one that came
Whilst I
just
was
when you were talking about it.
it.
I asked, what a coincidence.
Okay.
But now wants to know the difference.
So the difference between
brainwriting and brainstorming.
Brainstorming is sitting together with your team to think about possible solutions to a problem. Brainwriting is an individual thing where you are thinking by yourself and writing down what you think. So it's another form of brainstorming, but done by yourself. Exactly.
Okay, there you go. So now that's your answer right there. I've got Obiba from Osu. He says, who help with the stakeholder identification process? Since you mentioned last week that it's the first thing to do when given the nod.
So the stakeholder identification process is done by the team, led by the project manager. But mostly, because it's the first process, you might not have all the team members involved at the beginning of the project when you're giving the nod.
That's the point that he's making.
That's the point that he's making. So there's something we call pre-assignment. There are people who are already pre-assigned on the project based on their expertise, based on power, and based on existing agreements. So based on power, the sponsor automatically is pre-assigned. So he's one of the people you work with in identifying stakeholders. Right. You understand? And the charter or the contract that we're giving you would also help you identify which people. It gives you an initial scope of work. Exactly. So it helps you identify which people can be stakeholders. Again, based on power or experts, there are some certain people, because of their knowledge they have in what. So if you're working on a project and you know that this person is very knowledgeable, there are certain times, even before you begin the project, you want to involve or engage that person.
Right.
So based on expert judgment. So you would be able to begin the initial stakeholder engagement based on the pre-assigned people on the project.
Right. Obiba from Usu, there's your answer, right? The pre-assigned and the project team led by the project manager. Yeah. This one is Ibrahim from La Paz. Ibrahim says, at what point can one say he or she is done with the stakeholder identification?
When the project closes.
Okay, so Ibrahim, there you go.
When the project closes.
It means that as the project progresses,
yeah,
you still continue to identify new stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a continuous process.
But the point we try to make is that make necessary efforts to identify all or most of the stakeholders at the beginning of the project before you begin. Because it helps you in terms of time management and then cost management too as well.
I've got another one. This is Bernice from Dansuman. Bernice says, can you please go over the steps for stakeholder involvement?
For stakeholder involvement, I'm saying that for you to be able to have complete, proper stakeholder involvement of every project, it means that, one, you need to identify all the stakeholders on your project. You need to be able to define their needs or clarify their needs, wants, and expectations. That is their requirements, because that is what is turned into the requirements. You need to, so after that, you need to be able to also determine their interests and then their influence too as well. You need to be able to develop a plan that you're going to communicate with those stakeholders. Then you begin executing the plan of communication, because that is actually what you would, in engaging them, most of your time you spend in terms of stakeholder management or stakeholder engagement stakeholder engagement is communication. So you must get it right. The plan for communication and how you're going to communicate must be done right. Then also figure out how you're going to monitor and evaluate the communication one way or the other. I think that those are basically the steps.
Brilliant. Let me put the number out again. I've got a few more minutes. I could take a couple of calls. Numbers to call 0302216541. 0302216541. Please send in your comments to us on WhatsApp on 055-1111-997. While we're waiting for the phone lines to ring, Latif, I asked about whether or not power and influence are self-arrogated or assigned.
Yes.
And I think you started to answer it, so perhaps we can go back there.
Yeah, so I said that it depends. Usually I always say it is assigned because it depends on the roles and responsibility on your project. So the role of the person is a sponsor. The role of the other person is a project manager. The role of this person is a team member, so and so. Based on the roles and responsibility, you can easily begin to assign power and influence on the project. But there are some that automatically, based on expert judgment, where you know that, okay, this guy will be very influential because of the knowledge he or she requires, and you brought the person on board based on his expertise, one way or the other. But I'm always towards that side that says that it is assigned one way or the other. That is why we go through the tedious process of stakeholder mapping to come up with a power influence grid. You analyze through stakeholder analysis and determine, based on the requirements, where you should position each of the stakeholders.
And it's also clearly communicated, like you said. So
Yes.
everybody knows where it is and where the passion
Exactly.
is. Let me ask this. Is it important for there to be an SLA between stakeholders so that no one stakeholder by their action holds back the project?
Yeah. It's
There
very
is-
important.
It's important.
Yeah.
Because even though the project manager will adjudicate or the sponsor will adjudicate all disputes, it's also important for there to be that clear understanding.
Very clear understanding. And then you talked about issues arising disputes arising whilst embarking on a project. I said, yes, it is part of it. It's the reason why I mentioned that during your process of monitoring and evaluating of your stakeholder engagement plan, you'll be documenting issues and changes that come up out of your engagement with stakeholders. And these issues mostly bring about conflict. So as a project lead, you should be able to know how you're going to manage those conflicts as and when they arise. Not all conflicts can be postponed. So you should also know what kind
I
of...
like that.
Yes, because sometimes when you postpone, it delays the project. So you should know what kind of strategies you're going to use in engaging them. In project management, we say that there are about 5 strategies that we use when conflicts come up on projects. One of them is seen as the problem-solving strategy. So it's known as problem-solving or strategy, basically. Or in simple terms, it's negotiation strategy. It helps you solve the problem completely. There's another strategy we call the compromising strategy. The compromising strategy is a strategy that will enable each party lose a bit of what they seek to achieve. So if I wanted to use the new computers, all the new computers on your project, on the project, and then you wanted to use the old computers on the project, then we say that, look, you know what, guys, we need to come to a compromise. We would use your new computers for A, B, C, and then we'll use the old computers for E, F, G, H. It means both parties now compromise because you want to come to an understanding. Right. So there are various strategies like problem solving, compromising, accommodating, or smoothing, and then we have withdrawal. Withdrawal basically means you postponed the issue. Say, okay, you know what, there's an issue here, but we can discuss it. Let's talk about it next week, and then focus on why we are here. Then we also have the forcing or direct. Sometimes you just need to direct people to do their work. Do it as it is. Do it as I said. That is also another strategy. So depending on the situation you are in, you can use one or either form of the strategy.
Can stakeholder expectation change as the project progresses?
Stakeholder influence, power, expectation, interest is an evolving process. It changes. It can easily change as the project goes on. Someone who has low power, low interest can automatically be switched by whether by the sponsor, by the other stakeholders, or by the circumstance, basically to high power, high interest. I was working on a project that had someone who was just like an information provider. So he wasn't so much. He was interested in the project, very interested. So he didn't have power, but we say very low power, but high interest. Can you imagine that? Because it's a government project. This guy suddenly became the DC.
I was going to say, he even bought the project.
Suddenly became the DC of that particular area. What category is he going to be?
High power,
high interest. You understand? So it changes. It changes, and sometimes you don't know how and when. You just must be prepared for the changes as you progress on projects.
Okay. I think that's all time will allow us for today. What are expectations? We've talked about the world of stakeholders, introducing the conversation.
Yeah.
We've talked about identifying the stakeholders today. We've talked about planning.
Yeah.
What is our expectation in our conversation, God willing, next week?
How to manage them, how to manage the stakeholder process, how to manage the issues, how to manage the changes that will come out of the process of managing stakeholders. So we're going to talk about stakeholder engagement, how to manage stakeholder engagement.
Stakeholder engagement.
Yes.
What's the one thing we shouldn't forget in today's conversation if we remember nothing?
That, I mean, the framework for planning, the template you require to plan. In that for every plan, you must have the list of stakeholders. You must know their requirements. You must also know their level of interest, power, and influence. The timelines for engaging the stakeholders, how you're going to communicate with them, and then how you're going to monitor the engagement process. That framework is very, very important when it comes to stakeholder engagement plan.
Stakeholder management. This has been a wonderful conversation here on today's edition of Masterclass with Latif Abubakar. God willing, next week we come your way with yet another exciting edition. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you same time next week.